Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer. I apologize if the sound isn't great. I'm in a hotel room doing this voiceover and there are some noises, but I really wanted to get this done to share with you. Now, in this video, I will be sharing another new inking technique, this time done with embossing folders. If you watched my video yesterday, I did a fun technique with stencils. Well, this is a variation that's done with embossing folders. And the best thing is you can use whatever embossing folders you have on hand and a variety of inks to do so. Just need some basic supplies. Okay, here is the first card we're going to do. You'll be surprised how easy it is to get this fun look. So I have a piece of heavyweight white cardstock. This is Neenah Classic Crest Solar White and 110 pounds, but you can try whatever good cardstock you may have. I'm applying a heavy amount of Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated dye ink. You can try this with whatever dye inks you may have. Just give it a test. I think most will work well with it. I used amethyst on kind of half of that cardstock panel, and now I'm using violet on the other half. My ink pads need to be re-inked, so you can see I'm kind of struggling to get the ink down, but one of these days I'll re-ink them. The nice thing about this technique is it doesn't have to be beautiful blending, just do the best you can. One key thing to get two colors to blend together is to make sure you overlap the two, and that will give you a better blend. To clean up the ink from my glass work surface, I'm just doing a quick spritz of rubbing alcohol that I have in a Spellbinder spray bottle and then wipe it clean with a dry cloth. All right, now it's time to use an embossing folder. I am using a Simon Says Stamp embossing folder, and I just really like the details of this one, and I thought it would work great for this technique. I'll put my inked cardstock into the folder and I'll run it through my Spellbinders die cut machine. You can use these really thick 3D embossing folders with any different machine. You'll have to experiment to find the sandwich. I find when I use Simon Says Stamp 3D embossing folders, I usually use the platform, the additional white plate, I think that's the A plate, a folded piece of cardstock or packaging, and then the embossing folder on top. And that always gives great results. And look at that detail. I love the detail of this folder. Simon Says Stamp definitely has the best 3D embossing folders. All right, now here is where the fun new technique comes into play. I am going to use rubbing alcohol to change the color on this inked embossing folder background. Notice how the raised areas, those little tips, have a blue color to them, like a light bluish turquoise color. That is done with rubbing alcohol, and it's very easy to do. I grabbed an acrylic block. You could use a smaller one. I think a smaller one would actually be easier, but I couldn't find one. And I am spraying the surface of that block with a bit of rubbing alcohol. This is isopropyl alcohol, and I'm spraying the surface of the block with the alcohol, and then I'm flipping that block over and rubbing that alcohol over the raised areas of this embossed background. I will then mist a bit more of the rubbing alcohol onto the acrylic block and spread more around. And I'll keep doing this until I see that alcohol interact with that ink and it changes the color on the raised areas. And it's a great way to just get a different look. Now, you could use water to do this. However, the water will um, kind of puddle up more and it will spread more and it won't change the color as much. So the alcohol was a fun trick here. Now, I will say a few things. You could also use a alcohol swab and just gently rub that over the raised areas. If you don't want to spray rubbing alcohol, you could try that instead. I do recommend when you use rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle to use a well-ventilated area. You could take it outside. What I did is I set up a fan to just kind of blow that excess away to an open window. And here I'm freezing this so you can get a closer look at how cool that looks. I just really like the look of it. And this is something that works with a variety of embossing folders, and I will show you some examples as we go. Now I like that look so much, I'm doing another one. This time I didn't ink the whole piece because I only needed a smaller area, but I did the exact same colors. I'm running it through again so that I can just do the whole process over again. This time, instead of folded packaging, I used the shim that comes with the Spellbinders and just one piece of cardstock as a shim, and that did a nice result. And let me show you close up. Look at the detail of that folder once again. I'm really liking this one. So let's do that process again. I'm misting that acrylic block with the rubbing alcohol. Now, when you spray the rubbing alcohol onto the acrylic block, the nice thing is it gives a very even application. It doesn't kind of pool up like water does. So it really works well for this. I do like to repeat the process a few times just to get more of that new color kind of popping up on the raised areas. Now, as far as what inks will work for this, try whatever dye inks you have. These saturated inks work great. I think distress inks would probably work great. Just test what you have. Now, I'll talk a little more about the technique, but first let's finish up this card. I kept it very simple so that the focus would be on that fun look that we got on that bold background. For sentiment, I'm using an older Simon Says stamp with All My Heart die set. I'm not sure that this one is available anymore, but they have many similar ones. For the background, I used the Simon Says stamp Whirl Nordic plate. I love the detail of this. So I cut that from white cardstock and glued it onto a white note card. It's top folding white note card that's 4¼ by 5½ inches, and that just gives you some fun texture on the background. I like to mix different patterns of textures on my card. I think it adds a lot of interest and is quick to do. I then trimmed down the inked background, that second one that I did, to be about 3¾ by 5 inches. And I added that with some craft foam behind it so it has dimension. And I also added a little white heart die cut. Very simple design, but a great way to showcase that fun background. All right, the next card's very simple too, but another demonstration of this technique using different colors in a different embossing folder. I will say this technique is most effective with darker colors because you can see more of a color change when the alcohol hits that cardstock, right? When the alcohol hits the cardstock, it makes it like a lighter color. And if you start with lighter colors to begin with, it doesn't show as much when it gets lighter. So I do recommend darker colors. These aren't that dark, so you'll see it's less of an effect, but I still think it's cool. So I have another embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. This one's a new one and it gives the coolest heart pattern. This is going to be one that I reach for often because it has a unique look to it, like the center of the heart is kind of raised, and it will just be a great alternative to leaving like the background of a note card just plain white to have this texture to it. So I'm running it through my die cut machine. Sometimes I kind of go back and forth. I don't know if it's necessary, but sometimes I do that. And look at those hearts. Can you see how the center is kind of raised a little bit? I just think that is a really great embossing folder. So we're going to do the technique with the rubbing alcohol. And the raised areas on this particular folder are the center line of the heart, as I mentioned. So I sprayed some rubbing alcohol onto the acrylic block, and I'm rubbing it over the raised area. And you'll see it changes that area to kind of a yellowish orange. It's very subtle, but I will say after you do it 2 or 3 times and you let it dry, you'll see it more. It just kind of intensifies and it dries very, very quickly. Now, I know some will probably ask, could you use a brayer instead of an acrylic block? I was afraid that rubbing alcohol would eventually damage my brayer, but I think if you just do it once in a while and wipe it clean, it should be fine. But to be safe, I just used the acrylic block. I thought this was just really fun. And look at how the raised areas are kind of yellow at the top and white at the bottom. It's just very interesting. But I really wanted the shape or the outline of the hearts to stand out too. So I'm going to do one more thing to this. I put a little bit of tape runner on the back of the panel and I'm popping it back into the embossing folder. It kind of pops in place and fits onto the raised areas. And then I'll run it through my die cut machine again to make the impression. Now the impression's there, right? The reason I'm running it through right now is it makes that glue stick the panel in place in the embossing folder so that it won't shift. So now it's kind of stuck there for now. I don't want that to shift when I do the next step. Now, without removing that panel, I am using a brayer. This is a Tim Holtz brayer to apply Hero Arts white pigment ink. Any white pigment ink would work here. And I'm doing that over the background. See how the background on this is raised? Then I will close the embossing folder and run it through again. So this will press white ink into the background of our panel. So the hearts will stay bright color and it just gives the heart shape more definition. So this is something you can do with any of your backgrounds. Use that white pigment ink and it just makes it all, the pattern stand out even more, I guess. So then I can remove it from the folder. I trimmed it down to be 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I'm adding it to a top folding white note card. And I added the With All My Heart with white cardstock and the tiny little heart die cut. So very simple. You could add some bling to this if you wanted to, but I really like the color in the background and I wanted that to stand out. Now with this particular embossing folder, the technique really doesn't stand out much. You can see it on those raised areas, but I wanted to demonstrate that really you could use absolutely any embossing folder for this technique. If I would have used darker colors like I did on the first card, it definitely would have stood out more. But I love this folder and I wanted to put it to good use. Okay, I have a third and final card for you, and this is a bit of a variation of the same technique, and the results are really fun. So I'm again starting out with heavyweight white cardstock, and I'm applying a heavy amount of dye ink. This is the mist color, and then I'll add some lucky green color to it. Now, I will tell you, I just re-inked this, and I didn't give the ink pad enough time to absorb the ink, so you can see how it's kind of going down splotchy. That's my fault. It will smooth out as it dries. I changed my mind and I wanted that top color to be a little more blue, so I added some cadet on top of it, and then I even added some ocean. I don't know, I just wanted to put a lot of the color down, and really it will all blend together in the end. I'm using an old favorite embossing folder of mine, the Feather Spiral, and I'm placing my piece into that embossing folder upside down. So normally you would place the cardstock in there so that the raised pattern is on the front of the card. I want the background to be raised and the pattern to be like pressed down into the cardstock. So that you can see the back of it and see how the background is raised and the pattern is pressed down. So now we'll do the same technique where I spray my acrylic block with the alcohol and I press it firmly and kind of wiggle it around on our ink panel. So the raised area is the background. So the background of this pattern is what will change color. You can see that the background is starting to lighten, and the pressed in feather pattern will stay that original dark color. Another thing you could do is spray your glass work surface with some of the alcohol and then just put your ink panel down into that. That seemed to work really well. So I'm repeating that twice, and you'll start to see that the color kind of changes, it softens, and it just gives a really cool look. So the feather pattern stays dark because that's pressed into the cardstock and the rubbing alcohol doesn't reach it. Now, for finishing off this card, I used an older Simon Says Stamp Daisy Oval Frame die set. I really like all the pieces included in here, but I only used the frame today. I cut it twice from white cardstock and glued that together for some stack dimension. And then I trimmed my inked background down into an oval to place in the center. And look at how pretty that background is. So much texture. Next, I'm using a sentiment from this new Simon Says Stamp Sweet Treat stamp set. Now there is a stamp set, coordinating dies, and these coordinating stencils that can be used with the stamps or without. I'm just using the sentiment Love You. I love the style of this. I gold heat embossed it on white cardstock, and I'm using my scissors to cut apart the love and the you. I wanted to have the words stacked instead of next to each other. So if you just give it a little bit of a haircut, you can easily stack them instead. So I glue those directly into the center of our oval frame, and that's it. I didn't add anything else to this. You could add some gems, you could add some pearls, but I really wanted the focus to be on that inked background. I will say I love that frame around it. Again, mixing different texture patterns is something that I'm really enjoying lately, and I think the different pattern between the frame and the inside of the frame is really fun. So this variation of the technique just shows you that if you put your inked panel into your embossing folder upside down, you can get a different look. So I encourage you to try both ways to see how you can kind of change things up. And again, this technique should work well with a lot of different dye inks. The positively saturated inks work great, and I love the colors. And it should work with any embossing folders, whether 3D or 2D. And as far as the isopropyl alcohol, really, I think any of the percentages seem to work, and I link below to the one that I used. But you should be able to get it at your local grocery store. By the way, on the inside of this card, I used a sentiment that says, "Whatever you need, I'm here." And it's from the Simon Says Stamp CZ Design I'm Sorry stamp set. I really like the sentiments in here, like "You'll get through this," the "Praying for you," "You're in my thoughts," a lot of good ones in here. And there are also coordinating dies. All right, so there you have it, a fun technique using inks and alcohol to create really cool, colorful, textured backgrounds. If you missed my video yesterday on using rubbing alcohol with stencils, I encourage you to check it out because I love that technique. I will have that video linked here at the end. I will also have it in my YouTube description along with the supplies that I use in case you want to check anything out. I'm thankful you watched today, and I will be back soon with another video.